Welcome back to episode 3 of the Sleepy Podcast, a show where I attempt to bore you to sleep by reading articles from Wikipedia. Today I'm reading the article Peep Show, the British TV series. Please remember to like and subscribe at the start of the video, as you may be asleep by the end. Peep Show is a British television sitcom starring David Mitchell and Robert Webb. It was written by Jesse Armstrong and Sam Bain, with additional material by Mitchell and Webb, among others. It was broadcast on Channel 4 from 2003 until 2015. In 2010, it became the longest-running comedy in Channel 4 history in terms of years on air. Peep Show follows the lives of Mark Corrigan, Mitchell, and Jeremy Jez Osborne, Webb, two very different, dysfunctional friends who share a flat in Croydon, London. Mark is a socially awkward, despondent loan manager, while Jeremy is a childish slacker and unemployed musician who lives in Mark's spare room. Stylistically, the show uses point-of-view shots, giving the programme its title, with the thoughts of the main characters, Mark and Jeremy, as audible voiceovers. Though it never achieved high viewing figures during its original run, the show received consistent critical acclaim and has since become a cult favourite. In April 2019, 4 years after the final episode, Peep Show was named the 13th greatest British sitcom in a poll by the Radio Times. 3 years after the final episode aired, a fan-made podcast, a podcast series of The Pharaohs, a pun on the fictional book Business Secrets of the Pharaohs, was released, celebrating the cult show, featuring interviews with David Mitchell, Robert Webb, Sam Bain, and Patterson Joseph. As well as episode reviews, the podcast has gained popularity with the show's fandom. Main and recurring cast: David Mitchell as Mark Corrigan, Series 1 to 9, a loan manager at a fictional company, JLB Credit, intelligent and hard-working, but also pessimistic and socially awkward. Mark is the owner of the flat in Croydon, which he shares with his friend from university, Jeremy. Robert Webb as Jeremy, or Jez Osborne, Series 1 to 9, an unemployed aspiring musician and a work-shy freeloader who lives in the spare room of Mark's flat. He is selfish, juvenile, and arrogant, also considering himself to be immensely talented and attractive. However, Jeremy is more socially skilled and confident than Mark. Matt King as Superhands, Series 1 to 9, Jeremy's bandmate and friend, and an untrustworthy fantasist who regularly uses recreational drugs. It is revealed in the second episode of the 9th series that his real name is Simon. Olivia Colman as Sophie Chapman, Series 1 to 7 and Series 9, a co-worker at JLB who becomes scruffy and unstable, and serves as a love interest for Mark, and occasionally Jeremy, throughout much of the series. She and Mark eventually marry, but divorce shortly afterwards, and she later gives birth to his child. Patterson Joseph as Alan Johnson, Series 1 to 9, a senior loan manager at JLB Credit and Mark's boss for much of the series. He is suave and highly confident, and maintains a particularly reckless approach to business and life. Mark is in awe of him. Neil Fitzmaurice, I apologise if I said that wrong, as Jeff Heaney, Series 1 to 9, a colleague and nemesis of Mark at JLB. The two frequently crash over the affections of Sophie, with Jeff mainly his intimidating behaviour serving as a foil to Mark's mild-mannered persona. Itzy Sooty as Dobby in Series 5 to 9, as an IT worker at JLB Credit, and a self-confessed misfit. Much like Mark, who quickly develops strong feelings for her, the couple have a dysfunctional relationship. She is frequently disappointed by Mark's unwillingness to change. Jim Howick as Gerard Matthew, Series 4 to 8, Mark's sickly co-worker and sometimes friend at JLB, and later a rival for Dobby's affections. Sophie Winkleman as Big Suze, Series 3 to 7, Jeremy's ex-girlfriend and frequent romantic interest. She is attractive but naive, and described by Mark as a mental posho. Eliza L. Bennett as Sarah Corrigan, Series 3 and 6 to 8, Mark's sister and a solicitor who assists Mark in his divorce settlement. Throughout the series, she also engages in recurring sexual escapades with Jeremy, often contradictory to his intentions. Production. Writers Jesse Armstrong and Sam Bain met with writers Mitchell and Webb during a failed attempt to complete a team-written sitcom for the BBC. They had an old, unproduced script that they had wanted to revive called All Day Breakfast, and brought in Mitchell and Webb to help out. The show did not work out, but the four developed a partnership, and one idea eventually evolved into Peep Show for Channel 4. Peep Show was originally conceived as a sitcom in the style of Beavis and Butthead, revolving around two characters watching and discussing television. However, the idea was dropped due to the large expense that aired from clips at other shows, as well as being, as Mitchell and Webb's fear that, because their characters would be watching television, they wouldn't be in the show. Instead, Armstrong and Bain opted to produce a more story-based sitcom, with an unconventional filming style. The events of the two main characters' lives are almost exclusively from their own points of view, and voiceover providing their internal thoughts. Scenes in the show are sometimes filmed using cameras strapped to the actors' heads or attached to a hat, to give a viewer a point of view identical to that of the protagonists. The quality of the footage captured with this method is sometimes poor, and the technique was used less and less in later series. When head-mounted cameras are not used, scenes are filmed using the camera being over the actor's shoulder or directly in front of their face. Each scene is therefore shot multiple times from different angles. Armstrong and Bain's choice of the style was influenced by the 2000 Channel 4 documentary Being Caprice about model Caprice Bure, which featured a similar technique that had been copied from the 1999 film Being John Malkovich, which I think is excellent. Bain noted, "So it's a third-hand steal, really. We thought it would be great for comedy, hearing someone else's thoughts. The voices give you the whole other dimension in terms of jokes." The idea for using voiceovers came from a scene in the Woody Allen film Annie Hall, in which the true feelings of the character are conveyed by subtitle. The POV technique separates Peep Show from other sitcoms, and Mitchell claims that without it, Peep Show would have been similar to other shows such as Spaced or Men Behaving Badly. 2 pilots were filmed for the show, which allowed Armstrong and Bain to firmly develop and finalise the style of the show. Armstrong said, "On the run of doing those 2 pilots, we really created the show in a way that you couldn't if you had just tried it out." In the original plot, Olivia Colman's character, Sophie Chapman, had a voiceover as well as Mitchell and Webb's characters, Mark and Jeremy. The POV technique was also restricted solely to the character thinking at the time. It was later expanded so the view could come from a third party. Bain and Armstrong are the show's principal writers, and Mitchell and Webb provide additional material. Many of the storylines come from experiences in the writers' lives, particularly Bain's. For example, in the series 5 episode Burgling sees Mark apprehend a burglar by sitting on him, something Bain once did in a video shop before he was told to get off as he was scaring the customers. The writing for each series takes place 7 to 8 months before filming begins. Once each episode is mapped out by the scene, it must be approved by the producer, Andrew O'Connor, and Channel 4. Rehearsals take 2 weeks and filming lasts for 6 to 7 weeks. For the first 2 series, the scenes set in Mark and Jeremy's flat were filmed on a real property in Croydon, where the show takes place. The flat's owners did not allow it to be used for Series 3, so a replica was constructed in a carpet warehouse in Neilsden. Further filming took place at West London Film Studios. The theme tune for the first series was an original composition by Daniel Pemberton. Sorry if I said that wrong. And it's featured on the TV Pop music album, and can be heard on the MySpace page. From the second series onwards, the theme music of the song is Flagpole Sitter by the American band Harvey Danger, although the original first series composition was still heard briefly during scene changes. A working title for the programme was POV, as noted by David Mitchell in the DVD commentary for the first episode of the first series. In 2005, the Carsley Warner Company created a pilot for the US remake starring Johnny Galecki as Mark. However, the pilot failed and the series was never produced. Galecki went on to star in The Big Bang Theory as Leonard shortly afterwards. Spike TV commissioned its own version in 2008, originally written and directed by Robert Wilde, who is the executive producer of Curb Your Enthusiasm. It was to be written by Armstrong and Bain, but it never went to series. In May 2019, Sam Bain, co-creator of the original Peep Show series, confirmed in a Guardian article that another US remake was in the works in collaboration with FX Studios. It was being written by Casey Dorento and will feature 2 female leads. Series overview. Series 1. Mark and Jess start out with similar aims of sleeping with their next-door neighbour, Tony. Jess does this while she is separating from her husband, Tony. Mark is obsessed with his colleague Sophie, Olivia Colman, who is more interested in their manly colleague, Jeff. Mark has a one-night stand with a teenage goth girl. Mark and Jess endure awkward situations. Mark admires his boss, Alan Johnson, played by Patterson Joseph, and struggles to work out whether or not he is sexually attracted to him. Jess remembers engaging in fellatio with Superhands, Matt King, during a drug binge. Sophie beats Mark to a promotion, so Mark and Jess separately team up to prank call Sophie, which leads to her shooting them with a pellet gun. They also launch a pepper spray attack at Superhands, who has begun flirting with Tony. Mark sees a therapist and nearly succeeds in having sex with Sophie, but this chance was ruined by Jez's apparent drug overdose. Shortly afterwards, Jez claims that Tony has a terminal illness in order to persuade her to have sex with him. Series 2. Tony moves back in with Tony. Superhands develops a crack cocaine addiction. Jez meets and falls in love with and starts an open relationship with Nancy, played by Rachel Blackard, an attractive and happy-go-lucky American. They briefly enjoy a wild sex life, but Nancy then decides to become celibate. Jez briefly appears to be having some kind of success with his music career with Superhands. Mark's life is falling apart, and Sophie plans to move in with Jeff. Mark forges a brief friendship with a colleague, Daryl, which he ends after he discovers that Daryl is a neo-Nazi. Mark falls for a shy, attractive student in a shoe shop and makes an ill-judged visit to his old university, Dartmouth, where she is studying. Mark finds out from Jez that Jeff has been cheating on Sophie, and Mark informs Sophie of that, after which Sophie ends the relationship. Nancy asks Jez to marry her for visa reasons, and Jez accepts gracefully. Mark gets Superhands to lie to Jez and say that he had sex with him, but after he saw the reaction, they cannot go through with it. Jez and Nancy do get married despite Mark's effort, but they decide to start having sex again. Jez admits to Nancy, who is now his wife, that he hooks up with Tony. Nancy leaves him. Series 3. The series begins with Jez in a relationship with Michelle, of whom he is not fond, but with whom he plans to stay with because they have a threesome with another woman, Big Suze, Sophie Winkleman, re-enters Jez's life and has a new boyfriend, Stu. Mark and Sophie have finally become a couple, but Mark is mugged and is separated from Sophie once again when their employer relocates her to Bristol. Mary, Jez, and Mark's friend from university visit Mark's and arranges her to be sectioned. Jez and Superhands attempt to run a pub. Jez holds a magic mushroom party in the flat. Jez has a fling with Mark's sister while Mark is still in love with Big Suze. Jez serves in a jewelry and has a date with the female defendant. In the last episode, Jez tries to get back together with Suze, but is hindered somewhat by Superhands attempting to go cold turkey. Meanwhile, Mark plans to propose to Sophie, but changes his mind upon realising they have nothing in common. However, Sophie accidentally finds his engagement ring and says yes, which Mark reluctantly accepts to avoid embarrassment. Series 4. During this series, recently engaged Mark and Sophie visit Sophie's parents, and Jez has sex with Sophie's mother. Big Suze breaks up with Jez once again after Johnson offers to pay him in order to have sex with her, and she agrees. Despite being disgusted by the offer, she subsequently starts a relationship with Johnson, claiming that he's an alpha male. Mark's attempt at Johnson's request to head the group of staff formula of a merger between two departments is a failure, which leads to Mark being humiliated at the JLB conference. In an attempt to get away from Sophie, Mark joins a gym and discovers that Nancy is working there, after which Jez makes a failed attempt to reconcile with her. Sophie leaves on a business trip to Frankfurt. Leaving, Mark considers a fling with a woman whom he recently met at a school reunion. Jez finds some well-paid work for a handyman, the Orgazoid, one of his musical heroes, but discovers that his new employer expects him to give him a hand. Mark and Sophie attend couples counselling, which Mark hopes will unearth their problems and end the engagement. Mark is less than pleased when the conversation turns to his poor sexual performances. Mark and Jeremy spend a weekend on a narrowboat on the Shropshire Union Canal for Mark's stag do, at which Mark and Jez meet two sisters in a pub. After meeting the businessman father of the girls, Mark attempts to secure a job with him in bank law as a means of escaping an impending wedding. The plan backfires when Jez accidentally kills the pet dog of one of the girls, and the family find out when a series of attempts to cover it up leads to him eating it. On Mark's wedding day, Mark has resigned himself to marrying Sophie. Meanwhile, Jez is having difficulty jiggling a hungover Superhands and his best man speech with Nancy's imminent return to America. On the way to the church, Mark impulsively proposes to a woman in the cafe and steps out in front of a car, making him realise that he should call the wedding off. However, after hiding in the church with Jez when all the guests arrive, Mark, with visible reluctance, feels obliged to marry Sophie when Jez gives away their hiding place. However, realising that he was trying to marry her out by hiding, Sophie runs out on Mark after the ceremony, planning to seek annulment because she is horrible. Jez gets in a car with Mark, and he sees Nancy kissing Superhands. Series 5. Much of the series revolves around Mark's search for the one. His first date since the wedding is a double date which goes wrong due to the boring play, his date being uninterested in him, and then returning to the house to find a burglar. He asks out the IT girl, Dobby, played by Itsy Susie. Although the date ends badly when they find vomiting Sophie in the toilets, who reveals to Dobby that she is married to him. Dobby remains interested, even when Mark rejects her offer to date his upcoming birthday party to take a young Australian woman whom he'd recently met while speed dating. Jess runs out of money and steals from Jolson's credit card and is temporarily evicted by Mark. Jez asks Big Suze if he can stay with her and Johnson, but is rejected. He tries to obtain money from his mother after his great aunt dies, which reveals their strained relationship. However, Mark thrives in her company and is given the job of writing her boyfriend's military autobiography. Angrily, Jeremy ruins Mark's ambitions by revealing that Mark was raped by a veteran daughter, in which he hid initially while he was asleep. Jeremy and Hans get a manager, Callie, for their band to go to a music festival. Jez and Mark both have sex with Callie, but she quickly rejects both of them. Mark fails to ask Dobby out as she finally moves on. Jez and Hans join a cult. Mark is promoted to senior credit manager by Johnson, but does not fire Sophie as ordered, after she reveals that she is pregnant with what may be his child. In the closing moments of this series, Jez tells Mark that he recently had sex with Sophie, and the baby might be his. Series 6. The series begins with JLB credit closing down. Sophie tells Mark and Jez that Jeff is a possible father of the baby. The mystery is solved when Sophie reveals that Mark is the baby's father. Jez meets Elena, a beautiful young European woman who is an occasional marijuana dealer who lives in their building. Jeremy quickly falls in love with her, but things deteriorate when it is revealed that Elena has a long-term partner called Gail, who is returning to London. Mark looks for work, starting a company with an ill-equipped Johnson, almost landing his dream job as a guide for historic walks, then becoming a waiter in Gail's Mexican restaurant, all the while trying to get anywhere with Dobby. To resolve their woman troubles, Jeremy and Mark host a party, which ends in Jeremy trying to rekindle his love for Elena, Mark failing to win over Dobby, and Gail and Elena deciding to enter a civil partnership. Mark pledges to take driving lessons in order to help Sophie to the hospital when the baby arrives, but lies to her when he fails his test. Jeremy is upset over losing Elena, especially as she reveals that she is moving to Quebec with Gail. Sophie goes into labour early, and Mark is forced to reveal that he cannot drive. A drunk Jeremy attempts to drive Sophie to the hospital and nearly runs Gail over. Jeremy admits that he and Elena were having an affair, then Sophie drives herself to the hospital, with Mark and Jeremy in the back seat. Series 7. Zara and her boyfriend Ben are introduced, whom Jez meets while Sophie is giving birth. Jez is instantly attracted to Zara, and is selfishly pleased when he discovers that Ben is in a coma, potentially making Zara single. However, Ben recovers fully, and as thanks for being so friendly, Zara offers Jez a job in his record company, which Jez accepts as he hopes it will allow him to go closer to Zara. The job does not go well, as he attempts to sign up Super Hans' band, fails badly, and ends with him becoming fired from the band. Mark finally beats off competition from Gerard to become Dobby's boyfriend, although he continues to behave awkwardly in her company. Gail sacks Mark from the job at the restaurant. Jez pretends to be an intellectual in order to please Zara, which enables him to have sex with her. When Mark comes to meet him the next morning, the two find themselves locked in Zara's flat, causing Ben to discover that them and Mark to be missing his son's christening. Jez, Hans, Dobby, Mark and Mark's sisters and parents all have Christmas dinner at Jez and Mark's. After Zara tells Jez that she has split from Ben, Jez accepts her offer to move in with her. Mark needs to salvage his relationship with Dobby and asks her to move in with him, to which she agrees. Zara rejects Jez after she learned that he had been flirting with Super Hans' girlfriend and then dumping him. Series 8. The series begins with Mark waiting for Dobby to move in, while Dobby waits for Jez to move out. Mark suspects that Dobby will never move in, and that Gerard is trying to steal her from him. However, Gerard dies of flu. Jez and Hans amicably get the band back together, and this causes Jez to contemplate his life so far. He eventually agrees to undertake therapy sessions, which are paid for by Mark. Impressed by the therapy, Jez decides to become a life coach, but he fails a course with questionable value. Mark then gives Jez a fake life coach certificate, which he begins coaching anyone who'll let him, causing emotional and personal harm. Mark writes a book which is published by the incompetent vanity publisher. Mark, Dobby, Jez and Hans go paintballing. Mark gets a job in a bathroom supplies company where Hans works, but is soon sacked. He also starts to do evening course to gain an MBA. Jez falls in love with Dobby and declares his feelings, as does Mark. While Mark and Jez fight, Dobby leaves the scene and heads to New York, where she has a job offer. Series 9. The final series opens with Mark and Jez meeting for the first time since their fight over Dobby, with Mark still bearing a grudge over his role that Jez played in the breakup with her. Jess is living in Superhands' bathroom while Mark has a new flatmate. After reconciling, Jess moves back in with Mark and they go back to their old ways. Jess begins a relationship with a younger man, Joe, and also has sex with Joe's girlfriend, Megan. Mark seeks out April, Catherine Shepherd, previously seen in a single episode in Series 2, whom is always thought to be his perfect woman, despite her now being married. Dobby has moved to New York and has a new boyfriend. He meets Mark when he has discovered that Mark has been tracking Dobby's movements. Han marries Molly in Norfolk. Sophie turns up at the flat, depressed and appears to have a drink problem. She is in a relationship with another man who she thinks is having an affair. She offers Mark a chance to get their relationship another go, which he initially accepts, but Mark decides to break up with her, in an attempt to break up April's marriage and start a new life with her. In the final episode, all the duo's past lies and selfish decisions catch up with them. Mark loses his hope at the bank because of a loan that he gave to Jess, previously, ironically, to exploit him, without asking for the correct identification paperwork, and he is replaced by his rival, Jeff. Joe leaves Jess after his lies about him being popular and young are caught out, and Jess claims that he is tired of partying all the time. Superhands' wife is upset because he is unwilling to stop his disreputable lifestyle after he kidnaps and threatens April's husband. She finally leaves him. Superhands ends up leaving for Macedonia to open up a moped hire and leaves Mark and Jess right back where they always end up due to their bad choices. Mark losing his newest relationship and job, while Jess remains stuck in a rut of no prospects. It ends with the two watching TV together, asking and answering inane questions, with Jess thinking to himself how they both love each other really, and Mark reminding himself that he simply must get rid of him. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sleepy Podcast if you got this far. If you are still awake, there are previous episodes you can listen to. Thank you and good night.